Welcome back to the Spector Creative channel. I'm your host, Scott Toy Guru Neitlich, longtime toy maker and longtime toy collector. Today we're talking about bootleg toys, from the spooky to the weird to the legality issues. Well, this has been one of the more popular subjects that we've talked about, I guess, here on Spector Creative. And there's been a lot of comments and a lot of questions since the previous videos I've done on bootleg toys. And I have received quite a lot of letters and comments asking for more information. And while I do know quite a bit about bootleg toys from my experience working for large toy companies, I am also a firm believer in asking an expert. And one of the things I want to do on Spector Creative is bring you the most expertise information. So yeah, don't expect me to do my own plumbing. I will not attempt that, and do not expect me to do my own taxes. I believe everyone should be gone to for their skill set. So with that, we're going to talk to Greg Pan, who is an attorney, a toy maker, and like me and you, a big action figure pop culture collector. Greg's agreed to come on my channel and, well, give some expert opinion on the subject of bootleg toys. Without any further ado, Greg Pan.
My name is Greg. I am an attorney by trade. I have spent about 14, 15 years doing various forms of intellectual property licensing, brand protection, brand growing. I've spent about 12 years working for a major media company doing all types of very fun licensing arrangements with major properties, managing entertainment-based intellectual property. I was often managing the legal obligations and contractual obligations of a brand holder, providing strategy for a lot of major toy lines, and negotiated deals with pretty much every major toy company in the world. I'm also a fan myself. I have a high appreciation for the design, aesthetics, and the amount of work it takes to take a character from, a comic book, from a movie, whatever, and adding articulation to that and making it affordable to people, to the common buyer. It's not easy to do something with that level of engineering and make it into a mass market product. So what I'm going to talk about today, or what Scott has asked me to provide some insight about, is anti-piracy, bootlegs, counterfeits, knockoffs. I'm going to dive a little bit into this. Just based on what I know, I've given some advice to a lot of brand owners and companies out there on different ways you can protect your brand, what tools you have at your disposal. And I just have I have some experience what a lot of major IP holding companies have done historically. The IP protection side is not the most fun part of what I've done in the past, but it's something I'm familiar about, and I'm happy to share what I know with listeners today. So before I move forward, just want to note that none of what I'm talking about and sharing today is legal advice that can be relied on. It's not an official stance by any company that I've worked for. I'm sharing my insights based on what I'm familiar with in the industry, a few things I've learned, so that people can have a better idea where things are coming from, what risks are involved, what goes through kind of the thought process of an IP holder when they find out their products have been infringed. Okay, so let's talk about the different types of counterfeit toys out there. I kind of put them in three categories, and they're slightly different for a couple reasons, and I'll get into that. But let's categorize this first. So you have the mass-manufactured kids' toys. These are cheap-looking toys. Sometimes they're an existing mold. Sometimes they do a little bit of tooling, but the intent is to rip off a well-known property and sell based on that. Again, they're targeted towards kids. They're targeted typically to lower price markets that here in the U.S. we might say they're territories where they just can't afford a lot of the higher priced toys out there for numerous reasons. Sometimes it's distribution, but sometimes it's because when you're talking about a licensed toy that you find in mass retail stores like a Walmart or Target. There's a lot of things that go into the cost of that toy. There's a lot of safety tests that go into it. There's a lot of engineering to make sure there's no pinch points and things like that. There's a license fee if it's an intellectual property that they had to get a license from. There's another party that's getting royalties based on that, or requiring the manufacturer to pay them to make those toys with their brand on it. So there's all these additional costs, as well as just meeting basic standards, quality control, all those things. When you're talking about these cheaper bootleg toys, they don't worry about that as much. So I'll get into a little bit more about that later. The other category is similar, but these are more of the collector targeted toys. They're still knockoffs, they're still bootlegs, but they might be based off popular lines out there, but they're clearly not authentic. They have quality control issues, and they're much cheaper, and they're usually found on non-traditional marketplaces. And then the third one I'll kind of categorize as one-offs. Um, they're they're not typically mass manufactured overseas. Usually they're one-offs, and what I mean by that is they're people making them in smaller batches. Maybe they're 3D printing them. Maybe they're using home garage molds, and they're making them in lower quantities. Sometimes there's just accessories to fix like an existing figure, or like there's a missing weapon, or an unmasked head, or an improved sculpt, whatever. But usually these are um, lower quantities, and also typically sold for a higher price for what they are, given that they're usually custom made or made in low quantity. So they don't have the luxury of mass manufacturing. So now I've divided up those three. Let's talk about how they happen. So to the cheaper toys targeted towards kids, they're typically made overseas. They're mass manufactured. These are usually It's either a manufacturer making junky toys because they know there's a market, or a buyer might come along and say, "Hey, um, I want to buy a bunch of junky toys. This is how much I'm going to pay for them," and then the factory will make it based on that order. Um, Usually, it goes to a distributor. They sell into various marketplaces, other distributors around the world. Usually, they're going to smaller independent type toy stores, ones that, Walmart is not buying these products because Walmart doesn't want things being seized. They don't want to be selling counterfeit items. They, the types of stores we're talking about are usually in uh, other countries. These are kind of in um, smaller independent stores that are typically they're trying to buy toys for their target audience, and sometimes they can't afford the types of toys that are being sold in mass market that we see in the United States. Um, there is an organized crime connection for some of these distributors and manufacturers. Organized crime, while we traditionally think of them as dealing in things like drugs and um, money laundering and various other, horrible things, sometimes they kind of diversify their business, and then they deal with counterfeit items. So I have experienced um, counterfeit toys that had a connection to various crime syndicates around the world. Um, what else? So sometimes there's also a leftover mold from a prior toy. Sometimes there's someone to try to develop a toy, didn't make the license, but they still they invested in the molding. So sometimes people somehow get their hands on the leftover molds and make those toys themselves and just kind of bear the risk. As Scott has mentioned in um, other videos before, tooling is really expensive. It's usually one of the most expensive things when manufacturing toys. So a factory can get their hands on a workable mold, and they think they can sell the product in it, they're gonna use it. Um, Sometimes if they know it's a popular toy line, they'll recast something that's already out there and try to sell it. Um, at the end of the day, they're trying to make a quick buck. They don't have a license. Uh, they're they're skirting on a lot of things. They're going to skirt on quality control. They're going to skirt on safety. So a lot of these products are properly tested. And they're going to manufacture a ton for a buyer and then get them out and then move on to the next thing. That's typically how they operate. They're not a well-known brand. They don't care about um, building a brand for themselves or being associated with a garbage product. They're just trying to sell to a buyer who wants to, you know, they want to carry toys and they don't really care if they're genuine or not, and they want to spend as little as possible so they can sell them for a markup.
All right, so we have a lot more still to cover in terms of bootleg toys, and Greg will be back for part 2, discussing how toy companies go after the people that do the bootlegs. What kind of legal action, what kind of tactics, how do they defend themselves against bootlegs? That'll all be here on part 2, only on Spector Creative, coming soon. Thanks for our very special guest, Greg Pan, today, and thanks for watching. Do share this video and let me know what you think in the comments below. I'll see you next time.